everybody, and welcome back to the next conversation that we're having as part of Empowerthon, which is the inaugural fundraiser for the Parent Tween Foundation. So before I go any farther, Beth Miller, thank you so much for being with us today. I appreciate having you here.
Oh, thanks for having me. I'm excited for our conversation.
Absolutely. And it's one that's going to be near and dear to my heart, I know. So stay tuned. A couple of housekeeping tidbits. If you're new to Parent Tween Connection, I'm Clarissa. I'm the founder. And the whole point of Parent Tween Connection is that we are where parents go when they don't know where to go to find resources, either to help themselves or to help their kids. So we have a family community, we have a professional community. And the mission of the Parent Tween Foundation is to help bridge the financial gap that so frequently exists between families and the resources that can help them. If you are tuning in live, we're tuning in or we're broadcasting to our private Facebook group, Parent Tween Connection. If you're not yet a member, come on over. I have it open on the other monitor so I can see your request come through. If you'd like to join us, you can ask us questions there as well. And if you're tuning in on LinkedIn or YouTube, go ahead and comment there as well, and we'll circle back when we get notifications that there's a comment or a question. So, Beth, relationships. We're talking about why it's so imperative that the adults model healthy relationships for their kids. Now, this is a far cry from we're staying together for the kids, which I think is still a conversation that happens today. I know it happened a whole lot for older generations where, a belief in like nuclear families sticking together, even if it's awful, right, was perceived as the best approach. And we're not necessarily saying better or worse, but you're saying whatever it is, whoever it is, whether it's the original partnership in the family or a different one, we have to demonstrate healthy relationships.
Absolutely. It's foundational for our children's development in their own relationships as teenagers, in their adolescence and into their 20s, and their life partner, or maybe they'll have a couple life partners. But for the most part, I was talking to a client this morning, and she's having big time marriage issues because she could now see her parents' relationship and her current relationship dynamics with her husband. She easily gets defensive. She also assumes the negative. And that was communication that was role modeled to her by her parents, and she's adopted that communication style. And now it's wreaking havoc in her romantic relationship with her husband.
Mm-hmm. I can absolutely see that in my own experience, not so much from a marital perspective, but man, did I have a fabulous model of passive-aggressive communication in my mom. And I'm grateful that my partner called me on it and was like, knock off the PA crap. Like, that is not how we're going to work. So thankfully, we still fall into it on occasion, but like we've largely navigated that, but we also don't have kids ourselves that we're demonstrating to. What does this turn into for kids when they see these unhealthy models?
Oh, kids, they're so cute and adorable and incredible sponges. They are so empathetic and they pick up on all the energy. So whether it's spoken communication or just like you said, even that passive aggressive communication where it can be looks, can be body language. And when it comes to communication, like not that much of it's actually words spoken. A really good chunk of it is the tone of the word. So even if you're saying, sure, honey, anything you want, that tone communicates something in the body language. So kids, super sensitive creatures, pick up on all of that, and teens in particular and tweens.
Mm-hmm. Well, and I know one of the big concerns that we have, especially with young women today, is helping them recognize when they're in unhealthy relationships. And then a second one is that child trafficking is rampant. And so I'm going to guess that you're proposing, or perhaps not even proposing, clear out stating that what they're seeing modeled at home directly influences the likelihood of them ending up in abusive relationships or ending up in a child trafficking situation. Yeah?
There is some research, not in all cases, but there definitely is some research that young women will often meet partners later on that mimic similar patterns to their own father. Sometimes society can kind of joke around about this and call it daddy issues, but often we do repeat similar partnership as our
Subordinate energy.
dad. Yeah, in terms of the types of communication, the types of love that we're seeking out. Often we'll pick an emotionally unavailable partner, and
Mm-hmm.
because that was what we are used to. So there is definitely research. So to say it directly relates to abusive relationships, trafficking, I can't find the documentation on that one, but there definitely is a link in regards to
Sure.
the role
Some
model
kind
their
of
father played.
connection. Well, and maybe it's more on the other side that if we're modeling healthy behaviors, I would expect that there's some aspect of decreasing the likelihood of getting into unhealthy situations because they've seen healthy models.
Yeah, 100%. Absolutely. They know what it feels like to be in a healthy relationship. They've
Right.
witnessed their parents smiling, laughing, and the abundance, and not just when I say abundance, not we're not talking wealth. We're talking the abundance of well-being and love and just that connection. They sense that in their house. Their house is full and it's
Hmm.
loving and they sense that. So absolutely more likely to find that. They'll know, they'll be able to recognize unhealthy behavior like, "Ooh, stop. That's not
Right.
allowed. I don't accept that." They
Right.
have better self-worth when it comes to relationships.
And I think that right there would be for me as the adult in my community, potentially the biggest driver of why I want to have a healthy relationship is that if I can, it's a lot of us are like, oh, whatever, I can put up with it. But if it's like, no, but I recognize that me being in a healthy relationship sets the tone for the kids around me to model from that. Well, I want to model the most positive relationship possible to help them avoid those pitfalls, right?
Mhm. But it's it's really tricky because 80% of marriages are unhappy. And we're talking like a gamut, like we're talking a huge spectrum, but only 20% of marriages would actually say they're happy. So the likelihood of a child being exposed to some sort of unhealthy dynamics is a really good chance that that's going
Really
to
high.
happen. So there are some things that we can do as parents to help combat
Yep.
that, to help foster that. And open communication is huge. So just say dad's really angry or dad's passive aggressive. We got to debrief that with the kids, being like, okay, we're not modeling good communication here. And this is how this should be going down. And so having that open transparency with them is really good if they're being exposed to any unhealthy communication patterns, which they most likely are at some point.
Sure. So I know one of the things that we talked about as a foundation for healthy relationships and therefore healthy or modeling of healthy relationships is recognizing your own triggers. Excuse me. And not just recognizing them, but I presume the next step is taking action accordingly. So how does that show up? What insight can you offer to folks about that?
Yeah, triggers. We're constantly being triggered, but particular like as a wife by our husbands or as a husband by our wives. Our romantic partners are some of our greatest teachers. And this
Hmm.
can be to the betterment of our own self-growth or it can be like bring us right down. So those triggers often couples will say, they're making me so mad. Our emotions are our emotions. And so if I'm feeling sad, angry, resentful, embarrassed, shame, or guilt, that's mine. My partner didn't make me feel that way. So I have to recognize how he is triggering me. If he is he leaving the socks on the floor? Is he leaving crumbs on the counter? That is often the surface issue to something deeper below, maybe years of resentment, me asking for help with the kids, me asking help with dinner, or him coming home and just sitting on the couch. So that resentment's probably been building a long time. So recognizing that trigger right away, being like, okay, you know what? That's not about the crumbs. It's probably actually about the emotion I'm feeling, which is probably rooted in resentment. So it comes down to awareness first. Like this is how we stop the pattern. If we want to become good role models, we need to demonstrate awareness to ourselves and our kids. And that's the start of understanding triggers.
I had a coach tell me once that a trigger is like a washcloth that has been soaked in gasoline or in fuel and it's sitting next to the propane tank.
That's amazing.
And it's like all you need is like the one little spark and it's just this monstrous consuming fire, right? And we tend to, if that spark came from our partner or came from our teen or whomever, we tend to associate the entire fire with the person who offered the spark, when in fact, all they did was light the match. And the match itself isn't the problem. It was the match in combination with the gasoline soaked rag that made it just go crazy. You mentioned that it's largely rooted or can be significantly rooted in resentment toward a partner. Do you find in the coaching and the work that you do that it is also potentially a negative emotion or a pile of negative emotions relative to our parents that shows up in our relationships? I know you said like daddy issues, but like it doesn't just have to be quote unquote daddy issues. It could be other aspects, right?
Well, you know what? I think maybe is it let me figure out how I'm going to say this. Essentially, we get a belief system, a value system from our family, from our parents, from our teachers, from any like religious, like priests and anyone in your life. The adults in our lives help us create this value system that comes with beliefs. So if I come from a family with a say a stay-at-home mom, my mom she modeled to me a lot of doing all the daily tasks such as laundry, cooking, cleaning, taking care of the kids. Well, like the father may be out working and then he comes home. So I was modeled these certain belief systems. And then if I go into a relationship where, again, my husband just sits on the couch when he comes home, then all of a sudden I'm starting to realize, you know what, that's not the relationship I want. And then I might start to have this resentment. But I grew up with a belief system that maybe the mom did everything, but it didn't drive with me. It didn't work with me. I'm also working full time and then my husband's coming home. So we got to look at the belief system. Was it that you can relax? Like that was one of them too. Like if you grew up in a family where it's hustle, 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 work, 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 and then your husband's relaxing more, do you actually respect that? So I would look at the value system that you have, the beliefs around marriage, romantic partners, partnership, and see,
Mhm.
is that what you're projecting into your marriage? That you have these assumptions that all marriages should be this way.
Mhm. Love it. So then that brings me into, I know one of your values is authenticity, and particularly how we show up as our most authentic selves in our romantic partnerships, and that is also important because of the impact it has on the kids. So tell me what you mean by that, and then how does it impact the relationship and then obviously the kids?
Oh, wow. So your authentic self, like who is this person? We always hear this like thrown around. Be your true self, be your authentic self. And of course,
Mhm,
most of us be like, yeah, I am her. But no, are you really her? If you're feeling like any kind of resentment throughout the day, anger, sadness, like that is not authentic. Your soul, your heart does not want to be feeling those emotions. Those are unwanted. So who are you without those? Often clients I talk to will describe themselves as feeling just happy. Like, how happy are you? Scale of 1 to 10. Like, that is your authentic self when you're happy, when you're feeling joy, when you're feeling calm, at peace, confidence. When you feel that, you are your authentic self. So it's so important that we start to really figure out what the blocks are. So we're not going to look at just who that is. We're going to figure out what are the blocks right now to being your authentic self. Is it your relationship? What parts of your relationship? Is it that you feel like not good enough in your relationship? Is it that you feel like a failure or you feel like a fool or you feel not heard, not seen, you don't feel safe? Like
mhm,
there's all these blocks that may be bringing up those emotions that you don't want, keeping you from your authentic self. And often that can come out and with your kids pick up on that too, right? They pick up that you're not happy. They pick up that you're feeling not heard, that you're frustrated. So they pick up on that. So it's so important that you start to unpack your own stuff. It's like you have a backpack that you have with all these relationship issues. You have to
mhm,
unpack that so that your kids can see a better relationship. So when you become your authentic self, your kids see that too. You have more energy. So many women I talk to are exhausted. They're so
mhm,
tired. They don't have time for themselves and then they snap at their kids. So important that you connect with who you truly are, or at least have a vision of who she is and what's in the way.
mhm. Um, so many people that I know that I've engaged with, as I've done my own years of therapy, they're like, but I don't want to go talk to a therapist. Or my partner won't go to the therapist. Like we're having marriage problems. My partner won't go with me. What do you say to that? On either side? Because like I know that there are definitely families where it's the I'm speaking right now from my experience in a heteronormative family growing up, where like my mom wasn't comfortable going and getting support. And I know that's also kind of a generational thing, right? But like it's becoming more accepted. But like what do you do when you've got the other partner that isn't willing to do their portion of this, shall we say, do their part?
Well, you have two options. Like stay the course. You stay miserable and you just wait for your partner to be like, "Okay, I'm going to couples counseling." So that's one option. That one's not the one I would pick. You have the power to change your life and become happy. So one partner does have the ability to transform themselves, to transform their marriage. When we
Mhm,
talk about that authentic you, like that you will have the
mhm,
clarity whether to stay or whether to go, right? Because that might be like a lot of couples, when they're in this situation, they're thinking about divorce. So a lot of them, they're like, I'm exhausted. I can't do this anymore. So you might as well get to a place where you're happy. So, and then with that comes the clarity. You might actually become happy in your marriage when you release a lot of that past stuff that's in your backpack. And yeah, so it's so important to like start to work on yourself. That's step
Mhm.
one. And even before couples counseling, I always tell women I work with or their husbands, one of you needs to go do individual work, if not both of you, because if not, you're going to go to couples counseling. You're just going to talk about all the things you don't like about each other and what's not going well, which are like I talked about, the crumbs on the counter, socks on the floor, surface issues. There's deeper rooted stuff, reasons why you guys have become this version of each other, like with each other, this versions of yourselves to each other.
Mhm. So then, like you said, like kids recognize that. Kids can tell, there's the old adage, if mom ain't happy, ain't nobody happy, right? That like and I think that's true on both sides of if presuming a two-parent household, right? That like whichever partner it is that um is not happy, it's going to be clear. So you talk about showing up authentically and finding that happy, removing the blocks. How does your inner child play into that?
Ooh, your inner child is fun, loving, and that's one of the best parts about being a parent because you get to play on the floor, you get to go to amusement parks, you get to be a kid again. But your inner child also has some trauma, possibly mini traumas, major traumas. And so
Mhm.
this little inner child has all these experiences that have then helped create and form who they are, conditioned us to be and act and say certain things. We do it
Mhm.
automatically. We have 60,000 thoughts a day approximately. 95% of them are the exact same the next day. Most of them are automatic. You could be asleep and having the same thoughts as being awake. So it's so important that conditioning, especially from ages like 0 to 8, we've been programmed to act, think a certain way. We need to step outside of that when we start to have marriage troubles, relationship troubles, struggles in our life to see like, what conditioning is actually serving me, keeping me on my authentic path versus which type of programming is creating havoc in my marriage. So we have to
Mhm.
look at some of these inner child wounds, like whether it was bullying, not feeling like you're good enough, and maybe you're showing up in your marriage not feeling good enough, but actually it's not your husband's issue, it's your issue from childhood. Now you have to realize that you are good enough and start believing that you're good enough, and then you'll talk to your husband differently because you're like, you know what? This idea does matter. I'm happy about this, and I want to talk about this more instead of just sweeping it under the rug like, oh, he doesn't care. So it's
Mhm.
really important that we got to check in with ourselves. Speaking of parenting issues, I'm going to put you ask your next question and I'm just going to close my door.
Totally good. So the next question that I had is, for a lot of families who have teenagers, they are also navigating blended families and or I'm thinking of two friends right now who are in places where they've already got teenagers and they're taking next steps with their new partners. They're not the partners that they were married to when they had the kids for a variety of reasons. But so now they're in places where like they're starting to date again, or I've got one friend I know who's actually getting married again. They're just recently engaged and taking that step. So I think that brings another level of complexity because there's the step parenting side of things. But that aside, keeping our focus together in this conversation about that romance side, like the romantic partner, what would you recommend to folks who are just starting in dating, whether they've lost their spouse through death or divorce or whatever the case is? How can they start modeling these healthy relationships from the get-go when they've got teenagers in the home? Because that's a dicey proposition when mom or dad starts dating again.
I think talking to your kids is the number one thing you can do here. You just got to meet them where they're at. What are they feeling? Are they sad, angry? Are they like, cool, I love this new guy or girl? Like, we got to find out where their headspace is at so that they're not stewing in their own emotions or maybe their own grief of the past relationship, or they see you really happy, but they still miss seeing you with their other parent. So I think when it comes to navigating it, there's not a catch-all. Sure, you can read some parenting books on divorce and meeting new parents, which is great. Like that's all, knowledge is power. But I think when it comes down to it, you got to meet your kids where they're at and what they're thinking and answer any of their questions. And they may be like, I don't want to talk about it. Everything's fine. But you know
Sure.
what? Keep that door open. Keep asking. Like, I know you don't want to hear this again, but how are you doing today? Or you can start asking them some specific questions. How do you feel when the three of us hang out, or when he asked you this question, or she said this, like, I would even ask them some specifics. And the more that you can ask that are open-ended questions, not yes and no, it's better because it keeps the door open. Like, what are your thoughts on this? Tell me more about this, instead of just being like, are you happy or sad? Yes or no?
Right. Right. So then, what's your take on, some families are very much like, I don't want my kids to see us sharing affection because I don't want to plant seeds in their heads, right? Like, or, being overly public with, sexual influence or sexual conversations and whatnot, which, I mean, it's part of a romantic relationship for most human beings, right? So, like, where do you say, what are your thoughts on having those types of conversations and modeling, because that's part of a healthy relationship? How do we have those conversations with our kids? Because one of the things I tell parents is, if you're not having the conversation, either your kids aren't having it at all, which has its own ramifications, or they're having it with a whole lot of other people and you're not influencing the conversation at all.
Oh, yeah. So, again, where's your kid at? Like, you
Uh-huh.
know your kid better than anyone. And we can bring in your own triggers into this. Like, what triggers are keeping you from having this conversation? Like, just checking in with your own belief system. Are you feeling nervous? What's your relationship with your body and sexuality? Are you hiding certain things or feeling shame or guilt? Like, I would double check with yourself first before you go into this conversation. Make sure you're showing up as your true you into
Sure.
that conversation with your child, and then knowing where your child's at in regards to that kind of language and all that stuff. But really, number one, what is your trigger? And who's your authentic self, so that you can unpack that stuff first with yourself before having that conversation.
I love that, because I know there are a lot of families who are like, I would just rather not have the conversation at all because it feels uncomfortable, whether it's, I want to start dating again. I know some families that have taken the step, folks who've taken the step of dating again after a marriage is no longer. They're like, when do I even talk to my kids about this? And so that's a whole other conversation. But like, so many of them are just afraid to even have it. And so I love hearing you say, like, just start.
Yeah, absolutely. You got to start somewhere, and it might be awkward for everyone, but own your awkwardness, being like, I don't even know what to say, but I feel like we should have this conversation. So just make it candid. It doesn't have to be perfect, and grab books. Like, books are always helpful. There's something to help break the ice, something else to look at and
Right. Right.
talk about is always helpful as well.
And I've heard families or parents say, like, "Oh, I used a podcast, or I used one of our conversations that we've had here through Parent Tween Connection. Like, that gave me a space where it was like an easy entree to be like, oh, hey, I heard this conversation today, and it made me think of our situation, and I wanted to get your thoughts on it." So that's like, I like having conversations like this that can be conversation starters for families.
Yeah, that's a
So,
perfect way to do it.
all right. So we're saying we need to model healthy relationships because that's that's the foundation of what our kids will model their beliefs or their relationships
Yeah.
on. And if we want to help them have healthy relationships, I love how you said they're sponges. I think you're maybe the fifth or sixth speaker for Empowerthon, maybe even more than that, who has referred to kids as sponges.
They
They
are, though. Like, I'll just interrupt you for 1 second. Like, they are sponges. Like, when we look at the brain waves in which children function at, under a certain age, a lot of it's theta brainwave state. And that's the, like, your subconscious is literally wide open. Theta
Mhm.
brainwave state is that state when you just about to fall asleep, or when you get up, you hear you hear your alarm clock. You're like, is it Saturday or is it Monday? Like, that's your theta brainwave state where you still have access to your dreams, but you're
Sure.
aware that it's some day of the week and I'm supposed to be getting up. So they are in theta brainwave state, and then we slowly lose it as we get closer to our adolescence. But there's a ton of, like, their their subconscious is wide open, absorbing it. So, like, it's not just the saying, sure, our kids are sponges. Like, scientifically, your brain is wired to be absorbing your environment as truth. And so it's
Mhm.
so important. That's why we unpack things, or even sarcasm with kids. They need to understand that too, that they're not going to pick up on that.
Mhm. Yes. Side note, kids don't usually start getting sarcasm until like 8, 10 years old on the early end. So don't be surprised if your kids don't get it. All right. So we talked about why modeling is important. We've talked about paying attention to our own triggers. identifying our own blocks. And this is where a therapist, potentially, if there's trauma in the background, or a coach, depending, and maybe both of them together, can be helpful in identifying what those blocks are and how to help remove them and build new habits and new approaches to things. You talked about being authentically yourself, which is when, like, listening into, like, when am I genuinely happy and when do I genuinely feel like I'm living my best life? Imperfect though it may be, right? Like, we're not
Perfectly
talking like,
imperfect.
yeah, we're not talking like Mary Poppins here, but we're talking like I'm happy even with the challenges that come up. And then you said the inner child, thinking back to like what served your inner child, listening to that childlike voice in your head, that can actually help you become an even better role model.
Yeah, for sure, Ken. It's so empowering. You can take all your power back over the emotions that you feel each day. And it's so amazing to go on that journey of self-discovery. Like, what have I been holding on to? And it's layer by layer, you start to pull it back and you will feel more connected to yourself and your passions. And especially as like I speak from like a mom side, but as moms, we get so off path at some point after having kids and meeting their needs, which we innately do, but we
Sure.
sometimes forget who we are. So it's so important that at some point you need to get yourself back on track. And often you know that because you're being triggered constantly. You're upset, you're exhausted. Those are all
Mhm.
signs that you're not authentically you. So it's time to really start unpacking some of the reasons, those triggers. That's the first thing you can do. Awareness of the triggers, or not even awareness of the triggers, awareness of the emotions you don't want to feel. Then you can hop into triggers. And then you can
Right.
start to unpack the beliefs behind those triggers. I'm not good enough. I'm not seen. I'm not heard. Da 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 da.
And that's especially where a professional can help support, because sometimes those thoughts are insidious. They're there for all of us in some variation, or they have been at some point in our lives, I think. And so getting help in identifying, and like we're saying, like taking some of them away, but figuring out what do you replace them with, because you can't just leave the void either. You've got to have something positive to build on. Otherwise, like, there's nothing to build on if it's an empty space. So um any final thoughts for families in terms of how to or why modeling healthy relationships is so imperative for their kids?
Well, two things. The first one is regardless of what your kids are exposed to, as long as you can own it. Owning it is so important for you and for your kids because you're outing it. And when you out it, that's kind of like your shadows. Your shadows are the things that you want to pretend aren't actually happening or haven't happened in your life. We want to
Mhm.
out your shadows. And you're like, you know what? I'm not communicating that well with your husband or your dad right now. I'm not communicating that well with him. You know what? In retrospect, I feel really bad that I said this. And there's a level of which, like, how much do you want to involve your kids? But if they were part of it, like they got into that conversation right there, then on a kid level or tween level, you'll want to unpack that just a little bit. And just owning it is really powerful because then the kids know that's not okay. You know what? Mom said that wasn't okay. That's not normal. And the other thing is listening to your intuition is really powerful and having these conversations. Like, what does my intuition say? There's two voices. There's usually your intuition, or there could be like an ego. And ego's like the wounded you. It's the one that's angry at everyone because they're making me feel this way. My kids won't get their socks
Sure.
on and we're late. So it's listening to your ego or listening to your intuition. So really paying attention to your intuition is really key.
Love it. And that's, I think, also coming back to your being your authentic self. It's really hard, I have found, to listen to intuition if I'm bitter and angry and stressed and exhausted and overwhelmed and all of those things. Like, I just, if I get a feeling of like, no, this isn't the right pathway to go, I always have to stop and feel like, okay, is that really my intuition, or is that just the fact that I'm in a really bitchy mood right now? Like, sometimes I need to take some time and like wait for the bitchy mood to pass, right? Or like whatever it is, because then I can tune in. And if it's like an intuition that persists, then I know I can trust it.
Yes, you nailed it. It's total ownership of your feelings and not projecting onto others.
I love it. I could talk all day about this because, man, have I seen some interesting doozies of situations over the years. But I'm going to say, first of all, thank you so much, because I know I've learned, and I'm hoping that, I'm not even hoping, I know that folks tuning in are getting good information out of this. So thank you.
You're welcome. It's been great to be here.
And for those tuning in, I did mention at the beginning that this is part of our Empowerthon, which is our inaugural fundraiser. So where's the fundraiser aspect, you might ask? Well, here it is, the shameless request that says, if you just got some good stuff out of this conversation, there is a link in our Facebook group, our YouTube channel, and our LinkedIn page in the descriptions of this conversation with a link to Beth's fundraising page. If you got some good information, the best way you can say thank you is to follow that link on over to our website, make a donation, even if it's $5 or $10. Again, there's so many families that need help. There's so many families who, like, maybe they're thinking, oh, I'd love to work with somebody like Beth to figure out what my triggers are and figure out how to remove them and have a happier, healthier marriage, but I can't afford it. Those are the folks we want to be able to support. So anything you can offer helps. And we also have a little friendly contest going among our speakers that whoever is our fundraisingist, if you will, like whoever helps us raise the most, we will donate 20% of all the proceeds that come in through their link to a teen or family focused or parent focused nonprofit of their choice. And I forget the name of the one. It was something Rural Resource Center, and I don't remember the first part of it.
Women's Rural Resource Center. So it's a women's shelter for women who don't feel safe. They can bring their children and themselves to a shelter, even if they have no clothes or anything.
Is that in the Toronto area where you are?
About 2 hours from Toronto. Yeah, it's a rural. It's hard to say that word, like out in the country.
Right. Got it. Yeah. Not urban and not suburban is the point.
No, which is so hard to get access to food banks and any kind of resources when you are in a farming or small town community.
Absolutely. It's challenging enough in a more metropolitan area to find resources and to take that step away. So awesome. Beth Miller, thank you so very much. I appreciate you. And to everybody tuning in, we thank you for any support you can offer. Have a great one, everybody.